What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. So last week, I went over a lot, including the Cleveland Browns, whole quarterback situation going on right now. They have Joe Flacco, Deshaun Watson, Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, and former Steeler Kenny Pickett on roster. So I went in and really dove in and weighed my 2 cents on who I think is really going to start week 1 for the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, nobody in Cleveland wants Deshaun Watson anymore. That's a done, failed experiment. I don't think anybody is going to deny that. At least I hope not. So I weighed in on my thoughts and opinions on that. I feel like right now, it is Joe Flacco's job to lose, and I think and feel Shedeur Sanders will eventually prove himself to be capable of being the starting quarterback for Cleveland going forward. Now, that also depends on how Joe Flacco does for the duration of the 2025 NFL season. Whether or not he, stinks up the joint or something like that, we're going to really find out, how ready at that point Shedeur Sanders would be if Cleveland starts to struggle with Joe Flacco under center, but that's neither here nor there. We're going to find that out real soon. And as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. And once again, as I will always do and continuously do, I give all praise and all glory and all love and honor to the one true God, Jesus Christ, who is always with me and just allows me to do this every single day. And I can't thank him enough for just everything good that I have in my life because of him. And, I will go to my grave saying that he is the one true God of this entire universe. And, there's one thing I know for certain is he's never let me down, and that's including everything that has been thrown my way over these past 5 years. As you all know, I was a mental health channel way back when, and I really put that off to the side just because, the second I found Jesus Christ, then, everything, it got better. My life just got infinitely better, knowing that I was in desperate need of help at that point in time. And, I'm just grateful that I gave my life to the one true God, Jesus Christ. So, I'm always going to start the show off with that. I have to. It's just going to be tradition at this point, and rightfully so, as it should be. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, excuse me. Well, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter episode today just because not much is happening in the NFL world. Obviously, or college football, but we do have an NFL story we're going to talk about today. We do have college football we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk a little bit of the NBA. As we all know, the NBA playoffs are going on currently, and my Lakers, they stink. They are awful. They're horrible. And it's the same crap each and every single year. As I really appreciate the NBA championship that LeBron and AD gave us in the bubble. But since then, it's just been a mess. But what are we going to talk about today to start off? Well, we're going to start off with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It seems like a regular occurrence on this channel, like always. By the way, if you're not already, please like and subscribe to the channel. You're really helping it out and continuing to grow it. And last week, we had a heck of an episode. Nearly 200 people watching a whole 45-minute episode. Again, I really appreciate all of you, for tuning in. This is, just a fun time. This is just a fun thing for me to do on a weekly basis. I love that. And, thank you again from the bottom of my heart for all the love and support for the channel. Let's keep it on going. If you're not subscribed already, be sure to hit the bell, turn notifications on just so you stay up to date for everything that I post in the weeks to come, in the months to come, years to come. So as we get back on track, I'm talking today about George Pickens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Recently, as of May 7th, George Pickens was traded to the Dallas Cowboys for a 2026 third-round pick and a 2027 fifth-round pick. And Pittsburgh obviously sends Dallas George Pickens and a 2027 sixth-round pick. So here's my whole thing on this. I would have loved to see DK Metcalf and George Pickens on the same team, just on the field together, seeing what they could have done if Aaron Rodgers still indeed comes to Pittsburgh, which all signs point to maybe. Who knows? We're going to talk a little bit about that upcoming soon. But right now, as far as George Pickens is concerned, like as far as that situation is concerned, as a Steeler fan, I am kind of okay with this move. The only thing I'm not okay with is the timing of this trade. A lot of people have said that they love the timing of this trade. I personally hate the timing of this trade. If there's one thing that the Dallas Cowboys were absolutely putrid at, is acknowledging that they need more help in the wide receiving room. We have been saying that. Those who watch the NFL, those who watch football in general, have been saying for the past 2 or 3 years, Dallas needs more help. One, in the run game. They don't address running back. They did in this past draft, but they also don't address wide receiver well. They try to rely heavily on CeeDee Lamb constantly, and it goes nowhere for them. And now, I feel you have a legit number 2, a good complement for CeeDee Lamb by acquiring George Pickens from Pittsburgh. Because Pittsburgh, they have a number 1 now, and it's DK Metcalf. And I personally like having DK more on Pittsburgh than I do George Pickens. Now, those two, I talked about it before. Those two are just, those two are some of the biggest head cases in the NFL as wide receivers. You know, I talked about it months ago that when the trade happened, that, this is going to be the NFL crash out dream because of how, often they get flagged for 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. But back to the trade itself, I think it's good for Pittsburgh because you get a wide receiver. Pittsburgh has always been great at drafting wide receivers. We know this. This has been known and proven for years on end. If there's one position Pittsburgh never gets wrong, even though they may be head cases and maybe they don't stay with the team for the entire duration of their career, which very often that's the case, they draft and develop wide receivers better than probably anybody in the NFL. Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, Mike Wallace, Hines Ward, Antoine Randall, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, now, George Pickens. Like, they're always going to hit on draft picks. They do come with some baggage, though. And George Pickens, the reason he wasn't a first-round draft pick is because of his on-field and off-field antics and, frankly, his immaturity. But as far as the trade itself is concerned, this is good for Dallas and it's good for Pittsburgh. I think it's good for both. However, I will go back to saying that I dislike the timing of this trade because as a Steeler fan, you could have gotten more for George Pickens, especially if you did it during the draft or before the draft. If there's one thing you could have, really hammered Dallas on is the fact that they are desperate for a complimentary piece for CeeDee Lamb. You could have easily fleeced. I feel if you're Pittsburgh's GM, Omar Khan, if you were offering them George Pickens on draft night, whether that's night 1 or night 2, you could have offered Dallas George Pickens, and you probably could have got their second-round draft pick. The only reason I dislike this trade is because of the timing aspect. I feel like you could have gotten more for George Pickens' talent during the draft because everybody, emotions are high during the draft. Teams are trying to fill needs immediately with immediate impact players. I feel like if Pittsburgh tried hard enough during the draft process, they probably could have fleeced Dallas for their second round pick rather than settling for, what was it? A 2026 third round pick and a 2027 fifth round pick. Like a third round pick for next year's draft, you could have easily gotten a second rounder for this current draft. Probably if you offered him to Dallas, whether that's the week of the draft, during draft night, or in the weeks prior to the draft. Because if there's one thing Dallas always does, they take big swings. They're more than willing to do, crazy, stupid antics like this. I'm more than willing to believe that if Pittsburgh offered Dallas and Jerry Jones, George Pickens before the draft started, we'll give you George Pickens, and you give us your second-round draft pick. I'm more than willing to believe that Pittsburgh would have gotten that from Dallas. Now, as far as Dallas is concerned, I do not think that this really moves the needle, so far as Dallas being, equal to Philadelphia. I don't necessarily believe that this swings the needle that far in that direction because Again, George Pickens, he has all the talent in the world. But the reason, Pittsburgh was okay with letting him go is because of all the on-field antics and the fact that he's, very immature at his position and at his age. Me personally, I am okay with George Pickens going, even though I loved watching George Pickens. I thought he was a fantastic talent, and I felt, it sucks to see him go just because of how much talent he has, and I easily think that he could have been in the conversations for one of the top 5, maybe top 10 wide receivers had he, if he was more mature and if Pittsburgh actually had a quarterback that can get him the ball consistently. But, regardless, I think this is a good move for both Pittsburgh and for Dallas. In Dallas, you have a viable number 2 option to CeeDee Lamb. In Pittsburgh, you get rid of a head case and you save yourself from paying 2 wide receivers over $100 million. DK Metcalf already has that beyond $100 million contract. George Pickens was in the last year of his contract. He would have wanted a $100 million contract, specifically because of how much talent he has. He has the talent, and he knows it, and he can back it up when there's a quarterback that can actually get him the ball. Now, shifting into Pittsburgh a little bit, well, real quick on Dallas, I don't think necessarily they'll still be competitive as much as people think they are. I think it's a good thing that they have a complimentary piece to CeeDee Lamb, but I still don't think Dallas is all that. It doesn't matter if they get a George Pickens, if they got, like a Devontae Adams, if they got a number 2 receiver. I don't necessarily think it's going to swing the needle for Dallas to become instant Super Bowl contenders. It'll help, don't get me wrong. I might pick Dallas to finish second behind the Eagles now rather than third. But at the same time, Washington is just a way better team because Jaden Daniels is a way better quarterback than Dak Prescott. So I still think Dallas will finish third in the NFC East, but, I definitely think they're more in the running with George Pickens now on roster. And as for Pittsburgh, again, there's still no sign that Aaron Rodgers is going to sign with Pittsburgh, so we're going to figure out how Pittsburgh's going to maneuver forward in this. Again, going back to the trade, I would have loved to see at least what DK and George Pickens could do together on the field and possibly, put up some monster stats together, especially if Aaron Rodgers is definitely coming to Pittsburgh. Again, we still don't know that. But if I was Pittsburgh, the only thing that bugs me about this trade was the timing. You could have either done it during the NFL trade deadline, at least if you waited till the trade deadline during the NFL season this upcoming season, at least you could have seen how much DK and George Pickens would have worked together. Yeah, maybe it would have been a bunch of head case 15-yard penalties left and right. But at least you would have had something there that could either tell you, hey, maybe it's a good idea to pay both of these guys and keep them on roster while we find our future quarterback, or no, then we can move on. We can move them off. We can, trade them for whatever we can get, because at least you tried at that point to have 2-star wide receivers with a temper, basically. Or you could have done it during the draft and probably fleeced a team for a higher draft pick than just a simple 3rd-round pick for the year after in Pittsburgh next year. Funny enough, if a 2026 3rd-round pick, Pittsburgh could have gotten more out of this trade if the timing was right. Okay, now we're going to move into something I saw recently. Again, my best videos on this channel have always usually been when it comes to, at least when it comes to my sports talks, the best videos I've ever done was when I'm talking about the Michigan Wolverines. I will say that's very fascinating to me being in Ohio, that my best videos are me talking about the Michigan Wolverines, which is hysterical. But recently, as of last week, Michigan announced they will be suspending head coach Sherrone Moore in weeks 3 and 4 for the Wolverines matchups against Central Michigan and Nebraska. Now, this is obvious just because of the response the NCAA might have against Sherrone Moore in Michigan, of, basically, about the Connor Stallion sign stealing scandal that popped up in, 2023. And I've done this to death. I really have. I've talked about this a million times over, that I can't believe that this is still a thing. Sign stealing has been a thing in sports for probably as long as I can remember. If you don't think people are actually trying to steal signs, you're an idiot. You're clueless. They've been doing this. The only bad part is that Connor Stallion actually got caught. The funny thing was, I believe years ago it was him with a disguise going into Minnesota and, basically memorizing their plays and stuff like that, with a fake, basically a fake mustache or whatever. But when we talk about this scandal, when we talk about sign stealing scandals, I don't necessarily, you still does it help you? Let's say you were running power right and the Michigan defense knew you were running power right. Well, for the longest time, Michigan was not able to even stop Ohio State in general. Now they own Ohio State. I don't necessarily believe it was all because of sign stealing, and I think that was proven this past year. Michigan has had its weakest team with Sherrone Moore after Harbaugh departed for the NFL. This was the weakest Michigan has been, with Sherrone Moore at head coach. They had a down season. They did. They had a down season. But that same down season, Michigan still ended up beating the Ohio State Buckeyes, the eventual national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. So I still find it fascinating that this is actually a thing. A lot of people, at least in Ohio, and all my friends who are Ohio State fans, constantly clamored and said that the only reason they beat Ohio State all those years was because they were cheating and stealing signs. Well, this past year kind of, negates that a little bit. No, they're just better than you. Michigan is just better in general than Ohio State, at least right now. I'm not saying that, this past year, Ohio State was clearly a better team, but everybody has a bad Saturday every now and then, and Ohio State just had a bad Saturday against Michigan this past year. Obviously, it speaks for itself. Michigan, they beat Alabama in their bowl game, and Ohio State won the national title. So it happens. But as far as Michigan, self-imposing a suspension for Sherrone Moore, especially against two weak opponents like Central Michigan and Nebraska. A lot of people think Nebraska's going to be a little bit better, but I've been waiting for Nebraska to be a little bit better. I've been waiting for Nebraska to be better in general for basically 15 years. The Scott Frost situation from years ago, that hire was a total tire fire. Everybody thought he was going to take over college football, take over the Big Ten. That never happened. I've been waiting for Nebraska to be back for 15 years. I mean, I can't really say much as a Miami fan. I've been waiting for the U to be back since 2001. So that just goes to show how long I've been waiting. But in general, when it comes to Michigan, doing this self-imposed, suspension on Sherrone Moore, that's clearly just them trying to get ahead of what the NCAA is going to try and rule over Michigan. I'm not a big fan of the NCAA in general. They have been predatory in their practices for decades. There's just a bunch of situations that the NCAA in general has botched over the past 30 years you can think of. Some cases that I think of when it comes to the NCAA and how stupid they are and how they handle situations. I think about the Miami Hurricanes and, Nevin Shapiro, booster scandal from years ago where Miami lost, was banned from postseason play for, I think it was 4 years and, a loss of so many scholarships. But it's also the fact that the NCAA was paying the attorney of a Ponzi schemer to get information that could possibly indict the University of Miami program, if I'm remembering this correctly. Everybody was yelling death penalty at Miami, but it was so botched in the way that it was handled by the NCAA that everybody was screaming death penalty to the NCAA, which is sanctioning them, almost like a lack of institutional control. Those sort of situations. I think about the Reggie Bush Heisman Trophy, that they took away because he took money to help out his mom when he was in college. Now, again, NIL now, that doesn't matter. But back then, that was a big deal that, excuse me, that college athletes were not allowed to be paid literally anything. And yet they can, institutions and the NCAA can profit off their name, image, likeness. So, The NCAA is just a tire fire organization in general. The fact that they think that they can oversee all of college football and all of its antics that come along with it, the fact that they actually think that they can keep a lid on it and be the governing force in this, you got to leave it up to at least the conferences at that point. And Michigan doing a self-imposed ban, a self-imposed suspension, that obviously is a reaction to whatever may come from the NCAA in general. So Sherrone Moore will be suspended by Michigan for weeks 3 and 4 of Michigan's upcoming season in 2025 and 2026. So we're going to see really how much this affects Michigan, which is none. I don't think it's going to affect Michigan at all. The NCAA really wanted to get after Harbaugh. That's really who they wanted to take the fall and take the blame for everything that Connor Stallion did. Well, Jim Harbaugh won a national title at Michigan, and then bye. He just went straight to the NFL. It don't matter. He basically stuck it to the NCAA because he's no longer a coach in college football. So, he played that perfectly. And now, obviously, it all comes back now to Sherrone Moore, the head honcho at Michigan now. We're going to see, what else comes out about this. But me personally, I don't really care too much about this quote-unquote sign-stealing scandal anymore, just because it has been... everybody does it. Connor Stallion just took it a little step further, and, he got caught. I don't necessarily think it's quite the same as when the Astros were banging on trash cans to let them know what pitch is coming. Again, it might not be quite the same. It might be the same to some. Cheating's cheating, I get it, but I don't think it's really cheating if everybody does it, which all college football does it, but nobody steals pitching signs by banging on trash cans and, recording all the signs for, another team's bullpen. So I don't think that's quite the same. Okay, now we're going to move into a little bit of NBA to finish off today. So as of recently, obviously I'm recording this on a Monday night for Tuesday morning, but last night the Mavericks won the NBA lottery with only 1.8% to win, with a 1.8% chance to win the draft lottery. And I thought it was very fascinating. Now this means the Mavericks are going to have the first overall pick in the NBA draft. Since they let Luka go, it's been an uproar about Nico Harrison in general, which, by the way, Nico Harrison needs to just stop talking about it and making the situation entirely worse. But when you look at the Mavericks in general, I think they're going to go with Cooper Flag from Duke. Everybody, at this point, everybody feels the same way that Cooper Flag is the surefire number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft, in the upcoming NBA draft. So we'll find out eventually. But, some other names that, are going to be talked about highly in this upcoming NBA draft, the pair of freshmen from Rutgers, you got Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, other guys, including Baylor guard VJ Edgecombe. You got Texas wing, Trey Johnson, Oklahoma guard Jeremiah Fears, and those are just some other names that'll end up being, in contention for, the picks following the Mavericks, and those players will be considered heavily, maybe even by the Mavericks in general. That depends, obviously, on what they do about Cooper Flag. But I thought that was interesting that a bunch of teams went into last night having higher percentage chances, like up to at least 14% chance to win the lottery. And with 1.8%, the Mavericks actually won the lottery. So they can actually get another possible franchise player, even though I think that they have one in Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving. If the Mavericks were entirely healthy, I think that they would have actually, I wouldn't have said they would have won the championship this year, but they would have been very competitive in the Western Conference. And now, moving on to our final topic in the NBA, we're going to talk about the Greek Freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo. At this point now, it's more than likely, it's been reported that Giannis is going to search, elsewhere, for a better fit than Milwaukee. He's been in the league, 11 years. He had a decade-long, dominance in Milwaukee. And he brought Milwaukee a championship. I think he's earned the right to test the market. He's been nothing but loyal and nothing but fantastic as a player, as a person for the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously, he won the title, I think it was 2022, against the Phoenix Suns before they got Kevin Durant, before that mess took over. But, you know, the Bucks, right now, they're just one of the oldest teams in the NBA. You got Giannis and a bunch of blah on the team. If you're Milwaukee, you got to get younger. You have to entertain the thought of trading Giannis. You have to. You know, Giannis in the playoffs, now they only played one series against the Pacers, and the Pacers are actually probably about to send the Cleveland Cavaliers home as they're up 3-1 in that series in the Eastern Conference semifinals. But when you look in the postseason, that was really fascinating is the fact that, one, unfortunately, Damian Lillard tore his Achilles, which, you know, he's older, you know, one of my favorite point guards, you know, kind of in, you know, my mid to late teens watching and early 20s, you know, Damian Lillard was that guy. He was looked at as a top 5 point guard in all of the NBA. But, you know, a torn Achilles at, you know, I think he's like 32 at this point, you know, that's not something easy to come back from. You know, if history tells us anything, you know, Dame won't be the same player that we all know and love, unfortunately. And, you know, it looked good on paper for Milwaukee to trade for Damian Lillard to get him from Portland, but unfortunately it didn't work out. I thought it was a fantastic move. I thought there would be a chance that Milwaukee can go on a deep run, but that is not the case, unfortunately. They're old, they're brittle, and Giannis was just fantastic in these playoffs. For the 5 games that he played in the playoffs, you know, he averaged 33 and 15. He averaged 33 points and 15 rebounds, you know, and yet it still wasn't enough to. That tells me clearly there is nobody else on this roster that can help Giannis win a title or help Giannis in general when it comes to stuff like this. And it's off 60% shooting. You know, Giannis, you know, he may be a liability when it comes to free throw shooting every now and then, but, you know, overall, Giannis is still probably one of the top 3 players in the NBA currently today. But all good things must come to an end, unfortunately, especially in sports, and Giannis will actively be searching for possible trade partners or other organizations outside of Milwaukee after this past first-round exit. And some potential landing spots I can think about are the Thunder and the Spurs. I think that they would do greatly having Giannis. I feel like Giannis can start for every single team in the NBA. You know, if there's one team I would want to see go after Giannis with everything they got, and that's the Lakers, I don't think that they can, personally, unless you give up Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, and, you know, a bunch of draft capital to Milwaukee to get Giannis. And then at that point, you would have an old LeBron, you'd have Luka, and you have Giannis. But at that point, you would have absolutely no money probably to pay anybody else. If there's one team I would want to try, it would be the Lakers, but I don't think they can physically afford it at all. But, you know, Giannis, he brought Milwaukee a championship. You know, he set out on a goal to, you know, achieve. When he got drafted, you know, he's been nothing but a class act in Milwaukee. You know, he was drafted by them and developed by them, and he developed into an absolute superstar and one of the best players that we've ever seen in the NBA, and one of the more dominant power forwards we have ever seen in the NBA. He will now be searching for a new home this NBA offseason. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. Again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me.